It's 10 right now, but almost 10.
Thank you, everyone online, for your patience. We're just waiting a few more minutes to get started. If you need anything, go ahead and chat on the Zoom chat feature with me, but we'll get started as soon as possible. Thank you.
With 30 seconds.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Thursday, July 15th, 2021, and we're going to have a special meeting of the Reapportionment Task Force that today is going to be addressing only the needs of Elgin and the surrounding Elgin area. So that's going to be the focus of this afternoon's conversation. And just to let you know, I will have to be leaving here about 20 after 2. I have an appointment at 3 o'clock that I have to attend. So if the meeting continues on, I will leave you in good hands. But I hope that the meeting will be over at 2:30 at the latest. And as you know, if we haven't finished your work and there's still concerns, we will have another opportunity. We'll be meeting one more time if you need to. To finish the work that you have, and then we'll lay your map to rest as we go on to addressing other concerns by the mapping process. Again, this is not the final map. The final map will be confirmed once we get the census data in, and that'll be presented to the board again end of August or after Labor Day. After all the data is able to be evaluated and laid on to this proposed provisional map that we're drawing right now. So with all of that, and those are my chairman's comments. I jumped the gun a little bit earlier just to, we know what we're going to be talking about today. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Ford, Fries, Gums, Kenyon, Martin, Sanchez, Shepro,
Strathman here.
Gately, Meyer, Arnold, Shelkey, Afif, Hernandez, Pedersen, Rivera, Walter. Thank you.
Okay, very good. We obviously do not have a quorum, but we're not going to be making any decisions today, since this is just a subcommittee who's going to be moving those suggestions forward to the full reapportionment task force when it reconvenes.
We have a quorum of the, I think, all of the voting members.
We're not going to be voting on anything. Yeah, we do not have a quorum. We have 4. We do not have a quorum at this point. But there's not going to be any final vote on any of this information. This is suggestions. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Fonstock.
All right.
And Phil is here as well to help guide us through any kind of legal questions we may have.
Need the top hat.
Yeah, so I wanted to.
Excuse me, Phil,
sorry.
may I ask you to come up and maybe you can sit at the table with us?
Of course. Oh, we can reach you.
Yeah, well, you're not hiding back there?
We're all friends here. No. All right.
That's what I did in law school, is sit as far back as I could.
And I am reminded that we have to, before we turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies, is there any public comment? Is there any online? Hearing none. Mr. Fonstock, please.
Are there any board or members of the committee who are online? I didn't think so.
Didn't hear any.
Yeah.
Let me look.
No.
Uh,
Myrna Molina is online.
Oh,
Myrna, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, good afternoon. And, to begin with, we were trying to determine what would be the best tools to look at the maps and how some of the questions have been formulated. We've received feedback through the Kane County Board email address in the board office, and all of those requests have been documented. Those requests were reviewed and looked at and I guess, worked on by Josina Marita, who's the demographer. She's been working with all of those requests, and we do have feedback related to how they affect VRA districts and population, and a variety of other, responses. I think that the biggest question that we received was how are precinct splits and splits of populations handled, or what are the population totals that are representative of the VRA districts and the demographics. So getting a little more granular than just the shape of where the line is, but the population that's on either side of the line. So we're going to start from the premise that we don't have the 2020 census data. So everything is based on estimates. As you look at the estimates from a 2010 census, anything you use is extended from that base. So we have the 2010 census tract data, block data, and it probably represents the county to the degree of 95+%. I mean, it's that, accurate. When you look at 516,000 people 10 years ago and 535,000 now, the county as a whole changed by about 16,000, 17,000 people. Do the math, divide by 516,000, it's not 5% even. So there are some areas in particular up in the Northwest where we had large developments, and probably more of the growth is there than it is in Elgin or Aurora. So a lot of the areas in those particular locations, the demographics are similar. They might change as the census data becomes known by us. Population will change a little bit, but I think that marginally, if you look at the townships and the districts out in the west and northwest, you'll see that's where a lot of the population growth happened. In the neighborhoods and in the cities, and this is just opinion, I guess, but you didn't see the population growth that you saw out in the Northwest, which was a district that grew to almost 30,000 people is what we're estimating. So looking at the questions that we received, a lot of questions about a line going through a precinct and who's on which side of the line and why the line doesn't go around the neighborhood versus through the neighborhood. A lot of those questions have been captured. So not to repeat the same types of things, but if that's what we want to do, that's fine. So we wanted to show you some of the features of a map that shows you the precinct lines, the board district lines, and the splits. So I'm going to share that with you first, and then we'll talk about maybe how we could go about looking at requests and changes within just Elgin area. And I'll focus on Elgin in talking about it. But keep in mind that everything that you see is based on the census data, whether you extend it through ACS, you extend it through ESRI, it's still foundationally based on 2010 census data, and then the annual community survey, or it's based on, ESRI enhanced data, but those are all still estimates. And then we'll get the census data in August. And the great thing is that all the tools that you're going to see, the things that we're showing you today, can also be used once we import the census data. So we can reuse it.
We have a question, Mr.
Okay.
yeah. with respect to precincts, and I'm saying this as statements, but I'm certainly open to correction. The Voting Rights Act doesn't extend to precincts. And the precincts
Sure.
are not estimates in the sense of registered voters. We know what each precinct's registered voter is probably as of this morning because it's updated. But having said that, I think we've also discussed the fact that really, in a way, looking at precincts, and I agree it's useful to see where they're split, is that seems to me it's still putting the cart before the horse because there are issues other than district boundary lines. And I suspect that what you're going to show us doesn't even take into account precincts that might be split by maps of other jurisdictions like the state legislature or Congress or whatever. So
Sure.
for people, it's interesting that so many comments appear to have been based on precincts, but I think those are overall
Yeah.
something that could be incredibly time consuming now and doesn't deal with the fact that, precincts, except for electing committeemen, and I wouldn't denigrate the importance of committeemen, it does not involve most of the issues that we have to deal with. Compact, contiguous,
Sure.
Voting Rights Act, et cetera.
I think the challenge that you have is that the boundary which you count population and how you understand the population. If you're looking at it, the precinct, we can define the population, not the voters in the precinct, because that's something the clerk can provide us with, but the population within the block in the precinct, we can break it down to that level based on the data that we have. And again,
And those are obviously
Yeah.
still estimates.
Well, the census data would be, I would say it's aged, and then you could extend it and enhance it with estimates. But once you get that, you're drawing lines. And the question a lot of times is how do you subdivide or how do you count a lesser area than one of the whole units we have? So you have whole units of districts, you have board districts, you have school districts, you have municipal districts, you have precincts. About the smallest district we have in a map, for the lack of a better term, is a precinct. So that's a small unit. And then you split that and somebody says, well, what's half of that? Where does that line split that smaller unit? And that's the question we're trying to get at. And, we have block data. That's kind of as small as we get. So block, you could tell, what's split in a block, what's split in a precinct. So a lot of people use common terminology with precincts, so they're familiar with that and they know where they're at. So when we draw a line and we split a precinct based on a board district line, the question we get is, well, how many people are on each side of the line? Because I'd like that line to move a little bit farther to get the rest of the people in the precinct. Or, that's kind of in their mind the way they're seeing it. So this is just a way to visualize what's on either side of the line. And I think when
Some
we,
precincts are so large
yes,
in terms of
show
registered
you that.
voters.
yeah. Well, registered voters or population, either one.
But just to bring it down so we can get
Yeah.
started,
Yeah.
theoretical conversation.
Sure.
Those precincts are very large, but they may not be inclusive of this Elgin conversation, of our regional
So,
Elgin.
Blair, do you have the screen for the share for this? I just shared my screen.
Can you tell me what ESRI is?
Yeah, it's just a GIS software package that we use for doing the mapping. And it's just an enterprise like GIS package that we use. So the map that you see on screen is an online version. You may have been familiar with this. We had showed you the different versions that are available, and we're focusing on this, particular map, which is the version 2.3. So this was the last version that the demographer worked on with us for that. So a good example of what we're talking about in terms of precincts would be as you drill into this and start looking at the precincts, you'll see Rutland 2. And we know it's about 7,000 people in terms of the registered voters in that precinct. The population was 11,119. But this is not split. So what GIS, Tom Nikoski is here and Nick is here. Nick V, or I'm sorry. Anyway, we got, I'm sorry, Nick's online, Nick Kruger and Jason Verachter. I'm sorry, Jason. But Nick Kruger's online. They had worked on doing this split for you. And what this table shows is the actual county board district and the blocks in the census tracts and what precinct they're in the district. And then it shows you the demographics of the population. So this is, you know, the Rutland 2, the infamous large district. And if you scroll down, you'll see that it's not split. It's all in Tom Copey's district. There's no split. It's all in CB9. So that's kind of a good example of a really large district that is left intact right now as far as precincts go. And then as you move to the east, we'll get into Elgin, which is the, you know, Deb Allen had mentioned her concern about split precincts and lines that kind of cascade across this part of Elgin. And hopefully you can see this line. You'll notice that right here, this precinct is Elgin 9. Not that it matters that it's a precinct, but you'll see this line where it does a little bump out and it splits off this small square. And I think one of the questions is, what's in the square? What is that? It goes around it. And, you know, it's for population and demographics. That's the way the demographer drew it. As you go further to the west, you'll see Elgin 26 has a line that splits. Elgin 32 has a line that splits. And if you look at the population of the precincts, I mean, these are large populations, you know, over 1,000 people. And then it goes further out. But so looking at just this Elgin 9 precinct that's here in the middle, and if I click on it and pull up those information on the split, this is actually the split information. So I don't know if you can see that clearly, but the CB17 is getting 75 people from the split in Hispanic, and CB20 is getting 1,986. So anything that touches that block regarding VRA, those are the kinds of numbers that Josina is looking at when she looks at demography and whether she drew the line on one side of that block or the other. And it moves 75 people from one side to the other if you move that line as far as Hispanic. And that is what she is looking at when she draws these lines. So every time you say move a line, populations like this get moved, and she looks at what the resultant effect of that is. And we've gone through a lot of the different requests. I have a whole lot of them here that were asked from the different people. And what she would tell you in her response was whether or not the change that you requested would cause a problem for the voting rights district, or whether it would cause a problem with overpopulating a district or underpopulating a district. And while the precinct may be irrelevant, when you're down at a block level, I guess the only other way to look at it would be to say, are you splitting a block? And try to go down one layer further. Probably when we get the, well, not probably, definitely when we get the census data, you'll be able to look at blocks all the way down to the blocks, and it'll be current. We're within probably 3-4 weeks of having that. And we'll get really concise. I mean, we can get down to, these are the numbers that you have to work with. So, you know, if we started from a particular district and you wanted to look at particular lines, we could start with one of these and look at the boundary lines that you have. And we brought a paper version of the map over here. And one of the things that I was curious about would be, you know, if you can identify areas that you want to change, add, subtract, but then Another way of looking at it, and this is really up to the board members and the commission, is are there like core parts of your community of interest that you could identify for your district that you feel are this, community of interest that is core to your district? I could envision having 24 odd-shaped bubbles on a map, and then the rest of the space is kind of up for, interpretation. You could add it to districts to balance out populations, but you're still going to have trouble with the VRA because, as you all noticed, some of the districts have odd shapes to go and gather the population to represent the 63 to 69%. And that's where, you have some disruption where, you see the line jut out and grab a population and pull it into a district. Some of those can't change in order to get those numbers to work. And that's what Josina is trying to express to you, is that if you change the boundary and you move those people outside of that district, it becomes a population that's too low to make it fit the requirements of 63 to 69%. So she went through most of those requests, and that's what she came back with as far as her responses. Now, some of the minor changes, that little neighborhood area, or this area in Elgin 9, if you move that from one side to the other, let's look at it again, right? If you look at the population in that small area is a total of 140 people. So moving that into the district versus keeping it out of the district, what does that look like in terms of the overall district population? If I go back and let me zoom out here. If I zoom out and I'm looking at 22,055 people. So adding, what was it, 140? You'd be at 22,195 people to add that block. And it would move 75 Hispanic people from 17 into 20, right? And it would also reduce, it would end up reducing District 17's population. They are, let's see, where's the population on that one at? Let me see if I got it.
21,501.
So it would reduce them down from 21,501 by 140. So they'd go down to 21,340, 360. Yes, sorry. So that's the net change of that one little change. The District 17 is farther away from our average, which was 22,140 something.
And you'd have to pick up, so it's an equitable match, an additional 75 Hispanics.
Yeah. So that's just one little change in one neighborhood. What kind of the domino effect of changing it happens. I'm just trying to explain it.
And Mr. Shipper has a question.
So
And then Ms.
having
Beth.
earlier said that the precinct population or
Yep.
voter is irrelevant, I'm thinking back to Phil's presentation to us about having to look not only at the base population, but voting age population.
Mhm.
And I think, although I probably heard it, I either got confused or forgot. When you look at the voting age population, is it a relevant concern, either the registration level or the actual voter turnout? And does that matter, or is it only the voting age population? Because many of those Elgin precincts have low registration compared to other precincts. And most of them, not all, have even lower percentage turnouts. And so what is the relevant number there to look at?
Bill?
You want, so we're asking about voter.
That's usually my job, is to fall asleep, Phil. Don't worry. My question was, Phil, you outlined a formula for, in other words, you don't just look at the Hispanic or the minority population, you look at their participation levels, voting age, and so forth. Once you've looked at that, is it relevant to also look at the participation by that voting age population? Or does it not matter? In other words, what would be an example? So you've got a precinct that has 1,000 residents, but it turns out that on election day, they only had a 10% turnout instead of a 20 or 30% turnout, and there's a pattern. Is that something that has to be looked at in terms of evaluating how that interfaces with the base population figures? Or is it only the, or alternatively, I'm saying this way too long, do you say, if they don't vote, that's their problem?
Their
Or do
option.
we have to look at that and say that is a problem and we have to make adjustments for that?
Yeah. Check on the stem. There's light on the stem. Yeah.
It comes into the calculation more as in the relation to the ability to vote, Mr. Shepro, not so much as to whether they vote. It's kind of, we can only give you the opportunity to vote if you have the, if people don't vote because they don't have the ability, that comes in more than it does not taking the opportunity, if that makes sense.
I think so. So if I understand it, if the theoretical voting age population was 67% Hispanic, but the participation because of voter turnout was half of that, that would not be a relevant consideration because they had the opportunity to vote, but they didn't.
As long as the citizenship, and it gets weird because of the citizenship issue, but as long as the citizenship does not create the problem where it goes from 67 to 47, let's say, then, but overall, you're correct. For example, let's say you had a citizens voting age population of 60%. We really won't know that as part of our problem, but if we had a citizens voting age population of 60% in your example, and only half of those voted compared to 80% of whites and African Americans voted, you could still create a Section 2 district that is effective, but they decided not to come out and play, for lack of a better word, whether that be any minority or the majority population.
Okay.
I think of the adage is you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
That's a very good one.
Yeah. I think, Ms. Strathman, you had a comment? No, Mr. Tepe.
Madam Chair, may I make a suggestion? I looked at this from an entirely different perspective. I think at some point in time, we'll get the actual numbers when we get to go down to it. But I think the way things were done.
Can you speak into your mic a little bit closer?
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry. The way things were done did not look to me to be the ones that were most logical in relationship to the people that we represent. Okay. I'll start with Area 20. Okay. To have districts or areas taken out of Area 20 and be put into Area 19, where you have a natural boundary of a river, it just doesn't make sense. Okay. And, we made that suggestion at one point in time, and that was, they said that, oh, the numbers didn't make sense then. And that just grates on me. Okay. Just telling me the numbers don't make sense just doesn't make sense to me. I need to see more detail associated with that.
So
But to have that ignored just really bothered me. Okay, so that's point one.
is,
If
You
I'm-
want all of them or?
I'm gonna. Do you have, well, maybe it'll stretch. I'm just
hey,
want.
Blair, could you get her a handheld mic, please?
Just to your point about the river, because what we do for one, we have to do for all. What we do for one, we do for all. So we have got one 2, it
There's-
goes across the river,
Yeah, there's,
river, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Madam Chair,
At least 4 districts
I count 5.
that
yeah.
cross river.
the difference with this, with these two precincts that we're talking about that have been moved to 19,
Is it precincts or are we talking about districts? Precincts?
we're talking about the precincts that were moved from District 19, excuse me, from 20 to 19.
So,
What Mr. Tepe is talking about, the natural boundary, is that there's no bridge in that area of the river. It's the bridge is further south. So the natural boundary, that's what he's talking about.
so which precincts, on the map on the screen, which precincts are you?
1 is one of 1 and 4.
1 and 4.
And I don't know which of those you may have split that are in that area.
1 and 4 is, so 4 and Elgin here, these two?
Correct.
1 is the
Okay.
biggest one, or 1 is.
And
the
Yeah.
4 were originally in 20,
Yes.
all of them.
Correct.
Okay.
And
This
that
is all
also-
new territory that was not previously in the other district that have now gone across the river and been moved into it. Is that?
Correct. And there
accurate?
is no bridge in that area on the river. So,
Elgin 1 and Elgin 4,
correct,
you're saying would be in 20
correct. They have been,
and part of 2 or all of 2?
Well, what would be all of it because it's on this other side of the river.
What's the demographic data on those?
So Elgin 4 right now is split between 19 and 20. In 19, there's 469 Hispanic. And 20, there's 586.
Yeah, just give us, can you just give the numbers for the precincts? Just give us what, is it 1, 4, and 20, or those are the 3 precincts? Is that what I heard?
So we're doing 4. 4 has 1,697 people.
Okay.
And the split is between 19 and 20. So if you were to take, you said put it back into 20, you would be moving 863 people into 20 and 469 Hispanic in. So 469 as a percentage of 22,000, is what you'd be moving. That's the percentage numbers.
And would then, as we mentioned with the other precinct that we were reviewing,
Yeah.
we'd have to then find, to make
Yeah.
that a voting rights district, to keep all things equal, an additional, from another district, 469 Hispanics and or reduced population from another district to move it over so that they both maintain a voting right block. Is that
Matt-
correct?
Madam Chair, my concept is, and my ideas are ones of let's look at a different logical array of this. And when we make these suggestions, let's not inspect the individual ones and see what's going to happen because we don't have the real data. But my idea and my logic is that the premise under which some of these areas have been drawn needs to be reviewed and looked at from a different perspective. And that's what I was trying to do, and I was trying to share my ideas.
No, those ideas appreciated. But I would like to just stick, my concern is, just with the river example, the concern is simply with that district that you're talking about, 19 and 20, not holistic, all river.
But I'm not trying to say, draw the line for these districts. I'm trying to look at a concept of one that's slightly different for the Elgin area. And that's just one minor point of it.
So just briefly, the amount of population from 19 to 20 total, 863. And the other one is 693. So we're at 1,500, let's say, 1,500. And then the balance of Elgin 2 is another 460. So you're almost 2,000 people moving from 19 to 20, which would put 20 at 24,000. So where do you take 2,000 people out of 20? That's the question. Where would you take 2,000 people out of District 20 to make it the right population size, but not negatively impact and that's kind of
Again, I would like to share my ideas about the
Sure.
whole area rather than having it stopped and said, this one does
Okay.
this and that one does that.
a perfect example would be what part would you want to remove then from 20 to take it down 2,000 people?
Okay,
and
can I
think-
explain the other
Oh,
areas?
yeah, why don't we let Mr. Tepe complete his thoughts? Absolutely.
Okay, so to me, District 20 and District 17 are ones where the line between can be somewhat variable depending upon the numbers that you need. But you also have the situation in District 20 where you've got Elgin 40, for example, which looks like kind of a major inroad. And to me, that's something that should be looked at. But again, I don't want to look at the individual numbers. I'd like to look at the logic of what I'm suggesting.
Could you repeat your comment about Elgin 40? I'm not sure I understood.
Well,
what
you've got the line, you've got it coming in like a big area and taking and moving Elgin 40 from 20 to 19. Okay, and that's an area that had been there for a very long time, you know. So I would propose that we look at the logic of keeping that. And if that means that you have to move Elgin 43 or some other area, those are some of the things that would happen. But again, this is only one of the areas that I'd like to suggest that we take a look at. And when you understand the rest of them, perhaps you'll see where I'm going.
Is that 588 total population? for-
598, it would move from 19 to 20 in just Elgin 40, and then you'd have to make it contiguous, if you wanted to get the rest of Elgin 25, it's another 359, so
I
you're,
think was split.
yeah, it is, it's another 359, so that's another 1,000. So we're, approaching 3,000 difference. So, at the point where you're right, at the point where you've made, 3 or 4 or 5 of these types of micro changes, it starts to cause more domino effect. There's more changes that have to occur.
Which is why I'd like you to understand my macro
Sure.
rather than look at the micro to
Sure.
begin with now.
Mr. Shepherd.
I guess it sort of ties into it. If you look back at the upper area, so 1, 2, 4, and 5 are all split. Now, I don't know that I really want to get down into the weeds, but why are they all split instead of, I would assume the numbers could have been massaged in a way where you would get to the same population outcome without seemingly splitting every one of those precincts.
I would argue or offer that if you take in those precincts along the river on that east side, you will end up needing to reduce population in one of these west or other sides.
You're not understanding my question, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, so, and again, I didn't see the detail, but instead of splitting 2 in half and 4 in half, what would happen if 4 were in one place and 2 were in another? Was it necessary to divide every one of those as opposed to being able to have the numbers come out without doing that? And maybe that would be the question that Vern is suggesting is, what was the methodology that was used to decide we're going to split 2 and 4 instead of saying 2 goes here and 4 goes somewhere else?
I'm not really questioning the methodology.
Yeah.
I would like to provide my big picture, and then we can argue about whether it's logical or not. Okay? So,
There's something else as well?
oh yeah. Can we
yes.
go to,
Okay.
can we go to what is District 19?
Okay.
part of the thing is that we have, 4 people that are primarily representing Elgin. One person is representing South Elgin. Okay. It would make logical sense for District 19, in my mind, okay, for that to move down and to be primarily in Elgin. And based upon that, I would suggest that in order to do that, to move that to be a primarily Elgin area, that we would also include all of the area north of Route 20 into that particular district. That ends up being a fairly natural dividing line associated with that. So all of that area that's now in 22 would in effect then go to District 19. Okay. Now, again, don't get involved in the detail. So then if you begin to look at District 22, District 22 on the western side now completely ends at the township line. But that isn't where the city ends. The city of Elgin has gone way beyond that. So it goes out into Plato. So my suggestion would be that District 22 go west and begin to pick up those areas of Plato in particular, or whatever else was necessary, to make that go. Right now, this plan has it going into, I'm not sure which district now, is that District 14?
Yes.
Okay, but today it's actually in the district that's represented by Ms. Wanicki. So that area, which is in Elgin, really is, to me, a part of the Elgin neighborhood. We like to represent our neighbors, and it would be logical for that to be part of District 22. So those are the kinds of ideas that I think should have been considered. We've tried to talk about them, but I don't want to go and say, okay, we move 20 people here or 30 people here or 40 people here. Let's look at some of the logic of making it what Mr. Ford had referred to as neighborhoods, but at the same time coming up with the right kind of numbers to do a better job of representing our constituents going forward.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
And-
absolutely.
Mr. Tepe, are you done? I'm
Yep.
sorry.
I can't hear you.
Okay, Mr. Tepe, I've got the mic in the wrong place, so I apologize. Can you I really want to make sure I was trying to pay attention to what you were saying and looking at the map, and I wasn't writing.
I
apologize.
have pictures.
Okay. Okay, if you can
That's
give
even
those to
better.
us, we will see what we can do. I do want to say one thing and one thing only, and your ideas are the one thing that you're probably not going to be able to play a lot with is District 20. Just from getting a number standpoint to the Latino number, the more you play, remember that if you take any precinct or any area into District 20 that is less than 63% or 64% Latino, you're going to lower that percentage on the Latino, that you're going to have to find Latinos from somewhere else. And there's not other areas. There's not other areas that have heavy enough Latino population that you can grab from. Okay, so I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying 20 is going to be very, very, very hard. Okay.
I realize, but what I'm doing is I'm actually questioning some of the original premises that were used when these maps were drawn. And I feel that they should be considered. I just don't feel they should be dismissed just out of we can't do this.
And
okay? That just bothers me.
And let me say one thing. Other than the area, you know what I feel about total population. You've heard me say this way too much about the 10%.
Oh, I'm not questioning your
but
thoughts.
I
okay?
guess
Not
what
at
I'm
all.
saying is
And I
this.
don't mean to.
District 20 will be very hard. The rest of those districts are really decisions for this board to make. I don't think Josina is trying to make them. I'm clearly not trying to make them for you. Let's get that straight right now. District 20, Josina pretty much maxed out the Latino population that she could find a way to do. to get us to, I think it's 63%.
Mhm.
So it's hard to, unless you can find districts that, or blocks or areas that are greater than 63% Latino that are either in 19 or 22 or whatever, you know, I don't know the numbers of all the districts surrounding it, but unless we can find something, if we take something out of District 20 that is heavily Latino, and I'm not saying, I don't know these areas, so I'm not, you know, telling you that you are or not. But if you have to be aware that if you take out like a block or a block group or whatever it may be that is 70% Latino, you're going to have to find a block that's 70% Latino on the other side.
Okay, my understanding is that the state used a 60% number, not a 65% number. So the key thing is I'm in full agreement with having minority districts, okay? What I'm trying to suggest is that we need to also look at the way we represent and properly represent the constituents. And to me, the logic of my district, I'm suggesting major changes to the district that I'm in now, that having that to be expanded to include these people in an Elgin representation is just logical to me.
Um,
And I'm not
There's a lawsuit.
and I'm
now
not
pending
disagreeing with
because
that.
of the 60.
Okay. Yeah, the state, be a little careful. I will suggest that you be a little careful with what the state did because they're calling 43% districts majority minority districts. Okay. Some of those, they're also, so you have to just be a little nervous about that number. And they
It
also
was done
have
by a
some
mathematician,
75s.
right?
And who knows if they're really whatever. But I understand what you're saying. All I'm trying to just do is give a word of caution as it relates to 20. That's all I'm trying to do.
What I'm asking is take a look at this, okay?
And I'm
Not just reject it out of sight, but to
That-
really take a serious look at this.
And that's why I want to see what you did so we can give that to someone and say, once we see the real numbers, what does this do to show you what it does? And I don't know what it does.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can or
I-
can't do it.
I would say if we can get drawings of what proposed boundaries someone, thinks is like a neighborhood or community of interest, we can layer a shape on top of a map and show you what that means, especially when we get the census data. And that'll be, but at that same time, it'll also show you some of the pitfalls of that, which are now you don't have the matching percentages again. So you have to go back to what would you add or subtract. So I know you don't want to get into that today, but at the end of the day, once you get the shape that you want and you see the numbers, there'll be reconciliation, which is going to be an add subtract process.
And if we can just kind of reflect back on what the task force discussed and agreed upon, is that at this point, yes, we don't have the census data. We know that. And we can belabor that point until the census data comes in, but we know it. But we do believe that the ACS data is accurate enough to be able to draw lines, and that is something that the task force and the board agreed to formally, that was the data that we were going to be using until the census data came in. It was voted upon and agreed upon. So if it's a 3% difference, a 5% difference in vote or in count, or 0.5%, we don't know until we get the census data. But that is the data that we have all agreed upon to use and will continue to use to draw these provisional maps. So we have to work forward. We can't just step back and say, no, we won't do it until we get the census data, because otherwise we will be here discussing it till December 1st or whenever the deadline is. And if you can't come, and I'm just formally, and I'm going to say the same thing to Aurora, and I'll say the same thing to the task force. If we can't come to a mutual agreement upon all 24 board members, there is the next step where I can hand this over to Mr. Cunningham, say we are at an impasse, and he will be in charge of drawing our map. And I don't want that to happen. So we have to have some consensus. So if we can use and take a look at our ACS data now, and we also agreed upon, and there was lengthy conversation about the Voting Rights Act, that I believe the agreed upon average number for a district is going to be at 63%, mid-range between 60 and 65. So if we can have that target, so go a little low, a little above, but not up to 70, not up to 90, not at 45, but at around that magic number of 63, give or take, I think we being very comfortable with future lawsuits. And those lawsuits, it's my job to make sure as we go through this, and I have this weight on my shoulders, literally for everybody, with all due concerns about wanting to make sure that everybody has the district that they feel the most comfortable representing. And that's, again, for future board members within 10 years as well, that Kane County is not faced with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Of course.
The variance of plus or minus 5%, where does that apply? Does that apply to what part of all these numbers?
Just the total population number, if that's what your question is, Ms. Strathman.
So my district went from 62% Latino, as in 20, to 63% Latino, but yet you removed the Latina senator from my district, the state senator. So I'm confused why there is so much change to my district when it fell within the variance in the first place.
Well, you're talking about two different numbers.
Okay,
And I'm not sure what the variance was of your number. Okay. And I honestly, you're District 20?
yes, I am.
Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at your thing because it's blind to me as far as who's, what district's whose. And I want to keep it that way, honestly, to a certain extent.
I understand.
The Latino population at 62 to 63 is not the issue on the 10% or plus or minus 5% variation. The variation relates to the total population number. So your district, and I'm not saying it did, I'm using an example, which the ideal was 22. Your district could have gone to 18,000 people, which is obviously outside of that plus or minus 5%.
So that's what is the total population, that's the plus or minus?
Yes. Okay. You have really two big numbers. One is your total population, and we need everybody to be, I think our ideal was 22 and change or whatever the number is, right? We need the smallest and the largest to be less than 10% difference. We use plus or minus 5 because it's easier to discuss and figure out in our head. The other number is this number of Latino, especially in your district, because you are the representative of a heavily Latino district.
Correct.
So that is the other number. We don't know, or I don't know as I sit here without looking at it. We do have the current numbers, don't we?
That's the percentage differences.
Yeah,
from the last
Under
one.
the current map, yours is 62%. And under the new one, it's 63. You only lost 1%.
Gained 1%,
Gained 1%.
gained 1%.
Sorry, you were
Versus,
one
yeah.
low in the mean.
It goes left to right, yeah.
You were one low in the past, under the current map.
So what is that number then is negative 1% and now 0%?
That was, let's say the number was 22,000. You were 1% less than the 22,000 originally.
Which was the goal.
You were well within the goal.
Okay.
Okay.
That's the,
So you're right. You didn't change a lot percentage wise. All we really had to do is pick up a point or two on your percentage.
We have no authority, the follow-up question of the state district, the Senate district.
Yeah. And honestly, she's not in a majority district. She is not in a majority Latino district. Are you talking about Senator Villa?
No, I'm talking about Christina Castro, Senator Castro.
Okay. She is not in a Latino district either, I don't believe.
have the other one. Yeah.
She is in, right, you are correct.
She's she won the district, but she is not in a Latino majority minority district. I don't think there is any.
But you also have removed from 20, precinct 4, which is 53% Hispanic and 44% Caucasian.
Okay. And that gets to the earlier point I was trying to make, 50, you think, oh, we got a majority minority district, 53%. That 53% district, and I'm not saying that here, I don't know, I wasn't part of how she drew this, don't get me wrong. But that, I will tell you, adding that 53% district will actually lessen the percentage of Latinos in the district. Just from a math standpoint. I don't know, it'll lessen it a point, a half a point, a third of a point. It will, because you're taking a 63% district and adding a 55, it'll lessen it somewhat. Probably not a ton, but it will lessen it.
So this sheet that we have is the current numbers, not the ones that the district's boundaries are based on now. Is that correct?
I don't know which one you're looking at, so
That's
I
the one
apologize.
Justina sent you, I
Yes.
believe. So that would have been the numbers that she was using to create the version 2.3 map.
And so this is the ACS numbers.
It would be ACS numbers,
Okay.
2015 to
Yes.
2019 estimates,
Okay, thank you.
population.
Ms. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Now we have a working mic. One of the questions that I wanted to ask is, did you feel that the past map in Elgin, particularly 20 and 17 on the east side of the river, did you feel that those districts were in danger of causing a lawsuit for the county in the past? The Hispanic population traditionally in Elgin has been on the east side, probably a little more in 17 than in 20, but not too different. And traditionally, 17 and 20 have shared the east side of Elgin for, I think, more than 20 years.
Here's what here's what I can tell you. I don't know what this, here's what I can tell you. I don't know why she made the decisions she did, but I will tell you that District 17, which is your district, correct?
Yes.
Was 6% low for a total population issue. It does look like your Latino percentage was at 63% and has stayed at 63%, but it was low as far as total population. So your district needed approximately 1,200 people added to it to get to the zeroing, okay?
Okay.
And when
Now-
you did that, or when she did that, I'm assuming what happened, guys, I'm just making assumptions here, okay? I'm assuming what happened was that you got to be careful who you add that 1,200 to, right? Because if you add 1,200 white people, you've now taken that number down to, you've now at 55 or whatever you are. And so she had to add people to that district, which I'm guessing is why she took some, I'm assuming what happened is she took some out of 20 and combined those in a way to try and get them both to 63. You know,
Well-
there's no magic to this. I mean,
Sure.
there are different ways. Thanks. There are different ways to do it. That, you know, her goal was to get to 63% in that area, and she did it.
Sure.
Um,
And I don't think any of us in here are trying to get in the way of the fair plan, and we don't want to turn it over to somebody else to work on. It's just that we think that we can do some of the smushing of the population and the boundaries because we are just more intimately connected with our areas. And so it's, as Mr. Tepe says, it's those concerns that we're asking to be considered. I agree with you on the population problems, and I can tell you some of why. Excuse me for being so selfish here, but in the area of population described as precinct 19 currently, I lost 700 people. And in the area called Elgin 22, I lost 400 people. In the area called 17, I lost 350. And I have 3 other precincts where I lost 350 in population. Now, yes, I've had some friends pass away, and I'm sure people have moved, but that's a tremendous number of people who seem to have disappeared from my area. I am just hoping that when the census comes in, that some of those people will be found again and returned to my population, because in my experience, that many people have not died or moved.
There is in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, some people will disagree, but given the experts I've talked to, there is a very, I think, a significant possibility that districts with Latinos in them are undercounted. So when we see the real census numbers, your District 17 may not be 6% low. It may be up to 0. Your 1%, Ms. Strathman's 1% low may be +2. We don't know because of, I know I've talked about this probably too much, but because of the fact that the ACS is an estimate, Latinos has historically not responded as much, and there's no follow-up. Okay?
We do know the response rates though, right?
For the ACS or for the
I
census?
thought for the actual census.
The actual census is the highest response rate we've ever had. It's also the, and people go, okay, and I will say two more things I've learned more recently. People talk about the fact that the census, people aren't responding to the census because of the pandemic, because of then President Trump, especially Latinos. They didn't want to admit they, non-citizens for all those reasons. One thing that the Census Bureau does not stop when it comes to the census, they don't stop at just, hey, we went to the house a second time or a third time and no one responded. What they then do is they go to the neighbor. How many people live in the house next to you? Then if they don't get that information, they go to all the school records, all the public records, and try and fill that in. So it's a much more robust program than the survey. So you may end up with, especially if you have heavy Latino districts, you may have a lot more people in there than we now know.
I'm hoping.
And I'm guessing those areas you talked about where you lost population, I don't know your precincts, I'm guessing some of those may have well been heavily Hispanic areas.
Right.
And that would make sense as to why they've lost. I mean, hopefully none of us have lost that many friends in the last 2 years.
Of course, please continue.
If I can just continue, just personally, I don't want that odd dip into South Elgin. It just looks, it looks bad, it feels bad. And though it gives me an extra population of about 1,500 people, because I'm so low, the Hispanic part of that is 33.72% and 35%. So it's certainly not helpful in that regard. So I'm hoping that, I'm hoping that the census will restore some people and that you'll take a look at some of the suggestions we have on how to move our boundaries around a little bit. You will not see anyone in Elgin trying to slice the population one way or the other. Our Hispanic population in Elgin is, older than the time that we've lived there. So any of us who have run in the last, 30 years, maybe longer, have certainly been aware that we have a responsibility to represent our Hispanic neighbors, and we do. At least we try to do that. As you say, you can register people, but they won't necessarily vote. And let's say that I have a household of a large household of 10 people. I might have a couple of parents. I might have a grandparent. I might have an aunt or uncle, and then I have a bunch of kids. So I appreciate the large populations, but not necessarily the large number of voters. And then maybe even fewer people who choose to register, and then maybe even fewer people who choose to vote. But that doesn't mean that they aren't still our neighbors in terms of, school districts and neighborhood picnics and policing. We are still trying to be on top of that and respectful and responsible. And the cool thing in Elgin is that that has been going on for such a long time. So when we make suggestions to you about how we'd like to hold on to some of the population that we're used to serving, it certainly isn't trying to slice out anyone.
No, and
It's certainly trying to be inclusive in the way that we always have been.
I don't think anybody's thought that that's what what is going on with this board. If they are, they haven't really been listening. Two things. One is, if the district, as if we hope, that the Hispanics are undercounted in your district, that, let's call it the finger, whatever you want to call it down to the south, may not be necessary or may not need to be as big as it is. Because I would agree, it's not, if you said to me, look at this map, that would be an area I would look at first, okay? From a purely aesthetic standpoint, or compactness standpoint. And it also, your example points out the reason some of the problems with the ACS is because your grandmother and grandpa and aunt in that scenario you gave, a lot of times families won't include them because they're non-citizens. So they'll only say we have 7 people living in the house instead of 10. That's number one. Number two is your concept about the 33%. You're right. 33% isn't increasing that district number, 33% Latino. The problem is if the other districts around are at 2% Latino, her choices may have been very limited. Is that, you understand what I'm saying? And I'm not saying, but that I think is why when I talked to her about that district, I think that's why that went down there, because her choices around that were either already in another Latino district or heavily white.
Okay.
Even more heavily white than 66 or whatever the number is.
Well, I can assure you in my district, 33 is low. I have
No,
much,
it
much higher
clearly,
numbers.
it clearly is lower.
Okay.
I mean, you're absolutely right. The question is to the neighborhood, if you could go zoom in there for a second,
Sure.
Roger.
17. Oops, I hit the wrong one. Hang on.
Okay.
Give me a second. There's 17.
I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble.
She's going to throw it next.
It's right where that yellow is, right? Or is that?
This is the,
Oh, I'm sorry. There it is. Okay. So, obviously it would make more sense to go see where the EL 33 and 995 number is, just to the north of that. Obviously, from an aesthetic standpoint, it would make more sense to grab that and go all the way to the west on that line where 99, like exactly what Roger just did, right there. That would make the most sense from an aesthetic standpoint and maybe a neighborhood standpoint. I don't know. But that district could be heavily white, could be even more heavily white than the 33% Latino
EL
district.
33 has the mental health hospital.
Okay. And
So there's nobody there.
17
Right. I
gets
mean,
no
there is, but-
Hispanic.
We don't know if they vote.
Only 2 Hispanics and 30, yeah.
yeah, but see, so that's the point. 33 has 2,
Two and
such a small percentage. So it would affect it. How much? I don't know. But I can tell you that's the reason she made the decision. That doesn't mean it has to be what you guys do, but that's the reason for her decision.
That's fine.
And I'd be willing to say the logic would be she could go to EL 14 or EL 52 also.
Correct. Correct.
Mr. Shepard,
Just a comment, I mean,
microphone.
I'm sorry. Yeah. We did give some direction to Josina before we started. I mean, besides the voting rights, I mean, I think there was a clear consensus that we didn't want to try to put people into the same district with another board member.
Correct.
And I seem to recall that when we got the presentation, Phil specifically pointed out that this map did not take into account neighborhoods and so forth because they didn't have that data available to them.
Mhm.
So I guess to Mr. Teppe's larger point, we know from all the different presentations we've had that there are a hierarchy of factors. There are some at the top that are not optional. You might argue about how you get to them, but you can't ever say, for example, preserving my neighborhood is more important than the Voting Rights Act, because you presumably will lose if you do that. And I remember one of the town hall meetings where somebody said, well, what are the other factors? And we listed a bunch, but none of those fall into the category of, I'm forgetting the magic word from law school, protected class, right? And so everything we say about neighborhoods or boundaries or existing jurisdictional lines seem to me, in most cases, even when it says you should do it where possible, possible is a word lawyers probably love, because especially if there's two of them and they can argue about it, just like reasonable. You know, I would imagine that if you gave all of the factors and put it into a computer, you would never get the same map twice. My son, who actually did his master's thesis on redistricting, suggested that to me. I mean, so, you know, I guess what concerns me is the notion, if we want to take a global look at it, that seems to me like a massive falling domino effects, where if you start moving a whole township somewhere else, then, as has been pointed out, we have trouble finding 1,000 here, 1,000 here. If you've got whole townships, and we also have a contiguity requirement, and I don't know that that's a protected class, but I think that is an absolute nevertheless. You can't have District 20 have some precincts in Aurora and some precincts in Elgin. So, unlike Germany before the French Revolution, but that's another story. So all of these things, if you start opening up the whole thing, I don't know where we end up, except Mr. Gately and myself and Mr. Cunningham
And me
at
too.
a table someplace.
And I.
And I don't think anybody thinks that's a desirable.
No, and that
So-
is, I don't want us to go through there at all. So I have to leave. I'm going to be turning this meeting over now to Mr. Shepro, who will continue chairing this until the meeting is concluded. Thank you. I can assure you, Vern, I can assure you that we have listened and have respected your comments, and Mr. Athman the same. And of course, Ms. Allen, you know we have. And we, well, all of this will be carefully considered. I don't know what the map is going to look like as we go through all of this. And we'll, and your granddaughter can come by with a crayon. Okay. Okay, looking forward to getting that analysis.
Do we need to allocate any funds?
One interesting thing I noted when we were just talking is, I just glanced at the deviations, the districts that seem to have lost the most population are heavily Latino districts, which means that part of that's maybe an ACS issue. That if you look at the two that have lost the most population, they're also the two heaviest Latino districts in the prior map. So you may find that some of those districts that are Latino get a lot more people when we get final census numbers, which was one of the reasons we, we're fighting not to draw with ACS numbers. So there is, and I think those are the things when we get data on the 16th, 17th, 18th, or when we get it in a usable form sometime later in August, I think that's the first thing. I think in particular, District 17 and District 20 should look at, because, they may now be overpopulated, or they may be whatever it may be. So I guess all I want to say is I don't think anybody's saying that these issues, especially in the Latino areas, are set or don't need to be relooked at, especially when we see real numbers.
Roger, did you ever get through your presentation, or did we keep interrupting you?
I guess the last piece I'm curious about, and I think this speaks volumes to what Mr. Tepe is asking about, is if you were to take a highlighter and try to demonstrate to us on one of the version 2.3 or one of the other maps what it is that you see as your district area that you think is responsive to your request. I have had a couple of members tell me that they just simply want what they had before. And they simply want the district that they had before. So I understand that. And if you say that, I think that, we're starting from a premise that just probably is not going to work from the beginning. But I would like to see, in the spirit of Mr. Teppi's comments about seeing hey, I'd like to see it look like this, and these are kind of the boundaries. At least it gives us an idea of what they're thinking about. I'm not worried about, right now picking and choosing precincts, but you can tell me what areas you think are relevant to maybe an area of interest or population of interest. It's not that we would be able to do that, but it gives us the idea of where you're talking about. So then we can look at, the population in that area. We could draw the polygon on a map and, demonstrate what population is in it. It would give you kind of an understanding of what your request looks like in terms of population and demographics. And then obviously, you have the maps that were done by the demographer, kind of comparing what that looks like and what you're asking about. But I mean, that's a reconciliation process that can't happen here today. I mean, we don't have the data. It wouldn't be good to even probably go through the exercise, short of if you take a highlighter and show us the area you're talking about, we could be prepared to demonstrate what that shape would look like on a map. So it involves Nick or one of the guys from GIS drawing that on a map, pulling in the actual census data. We wouldn't do it with the estimates, and you would see what that looks like.
Like you say, it seemed to me that if you take the premise that the real numbers may turn out to be different from the estimates, it seems to me it makes even more futile trying to do something now
It does.
that takes that into account. I was going to ask for the people who were around 10 years ago, so Mrs. Allen and Mr. Gately, Kenyon, Drew, and you, Roger. I mean, what did we do 10 years ago that you would think was significantly different from how we've done this?
We lost 2 positions.
Yeah, you
Well,
eliminated
we
two
lost
board
2
districts,
positions,
That's where
and
you
then
took the extra from. Yeah.
and we did not have an outside consultant.
no, there was kind of the relay was through 1 or 2 board members to kind of provide guidance from this task force or from the committee to do the recommended changes, and then they'd bring it back.
I
So,
do recall that, I'm not sure about the Elgin area. I do know that 10 years ago, at one point, the Aurora people were invited to solve their problem and come back with a
Yeah,
consensus.
there was a lot of discussion in there, or same like we have now.
Oh.
Similar
yeah,
remarks from the board members.
But I think to me, the most significant thing is that the minority population has increased so dramatically
That's the difference.
in those 10 years that it's just very difficult to say everything just stays the same. And we know already that if you tried to do that, you've got an extra 10 or 11,000
Sure.
people up in the northwest.
yeah.
And what do you do with that if you're not trying to create an all new empty district? So I don't know. I mean, if you're going to do something different, you have to have a starting point and saying, this is what our starting point is going to be. And so I guess my question for everybody would be, if that's what you want to do, what is your starting point? Does everybody draw a map of what they think their neighborhood is? I think neighborhoods have different meaning in different parts of the county too. I mean, some of the newer areas probably, they don't even think themselves as being part of a neighborhood.
To your point, that same thing was brought up 10 years ago with Mr. Ford, his areas. He wanted his neighborhood. And the map was drafted at least 6 times and he still wasn't happy. So I don't know. I don't know what else could have been done back then. And I know the chair at the time said, well, we're just going to call for a vote. And I think Mr.
And I think the other point is that there are, that Mr. Lucan's comments, you can try all sorts of ploys, but the more you try to do that, the greater the possibility that a lawsuit's going to be filed. And the greater the chance that a lawsuit that does that will be successful. I would certainly be nervous about trying to get a map that was based upon majority minority districts. I think that would be a stretch. I guess we really don't know, but I don't know that we want the lawsuit anyway. I mean, the lawsuit is just going to add uncertainty. That doesn't mean we should be afraid of it. What else useful, Roger, do you think you could present
Mr. Chair.
today? Pretty clearly, we're not going to make a decision on anything other than we need another meeting and study. Yes, Mr. Tebby.
Mr. Chair, I think the key thing we wanted out of this, and I think we're going to get out of it, is we want to see our ideas considered. We feel that our ideas in the past were not considered, and we want to see them considered, and we want to see what would happen with these kinds of ideas being utilized. I mean, I don't think any of us are naive enough to say we're not concerned about change. I'll say I'm suggesting changes to my district that are quite drastic. And it's kind of interesting that Miss Allen, as we were discussing, and she said, I've got these kind of changes I'd like to suggest to your district, and they happen to be the same ones that I was suggesting. So that's the key thing we want, is to feel that our ideas have been considered and we can see the result of it.
If I could maybe put some words in your mouth, it seems to me that when we got version 2.3, that reflected some considerable changes in a couple of districts. But it doesn't appear that that occurred across the board. And maybe that was just because some people made more noise. But I guess what I'm hearing you saying is that even if your idea is radical, you'd like to at least present it and get some feedback.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
The map that you see on the screen is what was provided by folks from Aurora with, I believe, some help from a person in the county clerk's office. They drew this and they said that that was, what they thought was, representative of districts in response to version 2.3. Josina went through to look at this. We provided some, shapes and some things to consider. And the percentages that she came up with versus what was added up in the top penciled in area weren't the same. They weren't, even similar in many regards. So we're kind of hanging on to this for Aurora. And I fully think that we would probably draw these lines just to show them what these look like with census data. So if Elgin wants to do, a coloring of areas like this, so we could draw shapes. I mean, you're talking about, staff time to spend a couple days drawing the shapes and putting them on there, and then we count people and populations, and you would get another, map version. Now, you have to take into consideration the map work that the demographer did, the percentages, the totals, and you're probably going to come up with something totally different. It'll just be that much significantly different than what we already have done, or, that the demographer has done. I'm just saying that is one scenario. Aurora already asked us, our constituents from Aurora already asked us about this. So, if you're looking at what maybe they did versus what you're saying now, Vern, if you have the maps that you've already drawn, if they're similar and we can use them to draw shapes, we would entertain drawing those shapes. I mean, just to see what numbers come out of it. I don't think that's a difficult exercise. It's not a costly exercise. But when the numbers come back and they're not, representative of what you need, you have something that it already meets all those requirements. So then it's a question of, well, is there any area in between? Is there any place in between where you could, lack of a better term, can you close the gap and settle on something that you agree?
Or Deborah's term, smush it.
Yeah, well, it might be something in between. And Josina has conceded that some of these boundaries can change.
I mean,
We've changed
it
some.
would seem to me that some of what may seem minor points could be accommodated. I still would be puzzled to learn why, instead of taking an area that seems to be somewhat homogeneous in its population, that was being moved out of 20 and into 19, why was the line drawn this way instead of a block later? Now, that can drive Roger and his people nuts if we do too much of that. But
Well,
I think, it would seem to me that it would be useful to try to move at least on a parallel track. And I think Phil made the point at one of the earlier meetings that some of these requirements exist in parallel.
Yeah.
It's not like a Voting Rights Act is okay if the population gets screwy. Is that
we actually
right?
have that now with ACS.
Yeah.
You've got to meet both.
Yeah,
You
you
have a
have-
little more flexibility with the population, but the fact that you've got a perfect voting rights district with a 20% population variance won't work.
Yeah, there's a couple things there. One is because when Josina originally tried to do this, you'll see on your chart that everything is 3% or less, one way or another. Because we didn't know what the actual deviation was going to be and how accurate the ACS was. So I had asked her to try and get it down to like 2-3% most, plus or minus. So, there are ways to go plus or minus 5%, which may solve some of the issues a little bit as well. The other thing is Roger and I were just talking about, if you give Roger these shapes, his staff can put them on there. We can then also sit with you and what I call a heat map. And we can show different degradations of, let's say, red, okay, that just show every Latino, that show, okay, this block is 70% Latino. The darker the red, the more Latino it is. And now you can see, okay, a little easier, if you take, I got you a 63% district. If you take one of these light red, it's going to affect, and here's how it's going to affect it. And, we can show you that, I think probably almost in real time to a certain extent. After you give, Roger you do this, his staff will put it on a map. We then say, okay, here's the concerns with what you're proposing. Doesn't mean it can't work. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but here's the things you have to work on or have to be aware of to make it change to something that I can recommend as the lawyer. Okay. This, as I said, this isn't my map. My job is to tell you, yes, this is something that I could support from a legal standpoint. Everything else is really this board.
I seem to recall that 10 years ago, near the end game, our fabulous staff was able almost literally to sit there and move things around on the board while we were looking at it. You want to take this precinct out? Okay, if we do that, here's what happens. And, sometimes I think that helped the process because I think everybody began to get a better understanding that it all fits together, but it's all, again, we have a finite number of districts now because we decided we're keeping them at 24. And so you can't say, oh, well, we'll just take all these leftover people and put them in District 25 because not going to have one.
So
Actually,
in terms of
that's a great
today,
idea.
I think a good example, is any of these where they're on the border and you're talking about moving from one district to the other. They're all good examples. They're all good exercises, but you could go through, we could do, 15 different versions of movements, and you're still not dealing with the census data right now. So it's kind of an exercise in futility. You're doing it because you're curious,
probably it's worse than an exercise of futility because we're
Yeah.
putting you and your people through what is, I think, a pretty complicated exercise that may have no relevance at all.
Yeah, it may not materialize that the numbers are, even, they should be close. I think that we're within percentages, but there could be some areas where it's, significantly different.
We understand, but the longer this stays the way it is, the longer people say, oh, that's the way it is. So we'd like to see our ideas. That's why we're doing this. Thank you.
I mean, it seems to me that it maybe makes more sense to examine the global thoughts as opposed to trying to say, because again, to me, splitting precincts is the last thing we should be doing after everything's done. Because the precincts we want to fit to, in theory, Mr. Gately, you could weigh in on this. You want it as much as possible that you don't have one precinct that's in 3 different districts.
As long as it doesn't cause a lawsuit and we lose. That's what I worry about.
And many of the precincts need to be redrawn anyway.
Do it
The
again.
precincts need to be redrawn. I mean, Mr. Cunningham is not strongly in favor of that, but I think he has come to realize that you just can't have precincts with 4,000 registered voters. But that's going to be a process unto itself. And it seems to me that the harder questions are we going to start with a whole new set of priorities as to what we do? Are we now going to say municipal boundaries are more important than geographical boundaries or whatever? So I don't know. My suggestion would be, because we could go on and on here forever, and if you let me, I probably would, is that it seems to be the next step, Roger and Phil, is, we've already had some people come in and have some detailed discussions about what they wanted to be done. It seems to me if anybody feels they hadn't had that opportunity, because obviously you could see there was a lot of difference in 2 districts out west from the first map we saw to version 2.3. I guess my other observation is that many board members seem to be okay with their districts. That shouldn't be the end of the discussion, but I think that Vern, I mean, yeah, if you've got some ideas that you feel were not really floated through staff, I think that ought to happen soon.
Give it to us.
So the least people know what kind of direction we'll get, because, what now? The census data we think now is what, mid-August?
Mid-August,
Mid-August. And I think,
30 days.
and then we were told that probably within a week, we would have actionable data at the local level. So there's not really that much time to go for that at this point.
And let me just reiterate to Mr. Tepe, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but if you give us those maps now, okay, we can draw that for you in the meantime, which I think is what you're looking for. And then we'll then later be able to it's easy to just put those data in that shapefile that we have already drawn for you.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, even though I'm not on this committee, I'd suggest we adjourn.
Okay, is that Phil's suggestion? Does that work for you?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I don't know, we can't adjourn because we never officially convened, but I could now, I guess, announce if anybody has any other comments. Otherwise, I will note the absence of quorum, and the committee will stand in recess. I believe that there is another meeting, special meeting scheduled for Friday with the Aurora representatives. Those who you may benefit from hearing what we did today. Similar problems. So I will declare that this meeting is adjourned, and that this special meeting is adjourned, and the committee task force will meet at the call of Chairman Parag. Thank you for coming. I think it was a useful discussion, because I think we now at least have some idea of what you need to do to get your ideas across. And I would urge everybody to think about the precinct issue, because
I'll have
it is our decision. It is not Mr. Cunningham's decision. He can make recommendations, but it is ultimately the board that divides the precincts. So with that,
And
meeting is concluded.
That's where
can
you're
we
at.
say thank you to the members of the